If you saw a man standing in the middle of a two-lane highway, arms outstretched in the pouring rain, blocking dozens of angry drivers just to protect something barely moving on the asphalt, would you stop to help him or tell him to move? That question echoed in the minds of nearly everyone who sat idle in their cars that day, their windshields fogging up while the wipers ticked like impatient hearts. The traffic backup was over 2 miles long, horns blaring, tempers flaring, but the man refused to move. He didn't yell. He didn't flinch. He just stood there like a sentinel, his eyes locked on the road below. It wasn't a protest. It wasn't an accident. It was something else, something slower, something alive. William Davis hadn't planned on causing a traffic jam that Tuesday morning. In truth, he hadn't planned much of anything in the last year. After 32 years as a forest ranger, he retired early following the death of his wife, Linda, pancreatic cancer. 6 months from diagnosis to goodbye. After that, the days blurred. He moved into a modest trailer home just outside Homestead, Florida, nestled between the Everglades and the static of forgotten radio stations. The trees whispered to him sometimes, the way they did when he still wore his badge, but mostly, he just sat in silence. Grief had turned William into a ghost of himself. He didn't sleep well, didn't eat much, didn't talk unless necessary. The walls of his trailer were lined with old nature books, empty mugs, and framed photos he couldn't bear to take down. The only sign of life came from a radio on the kitchen counter that buzzed with late-night AM voices, talking about fishing, politics, and the weather. He had friends once, co-workers, a daughter who called weekly, but his world had gone quiet. Until that morning, until the slow creature entered his lane and changed everything. It had rained the night before, one of those sticky Florida storms that doesn't roar so much as it seeps into everything, making the air thick and restless. William had left home to buy coffee and eggs, taking the back highway like always. The mist was just starting to lift when he saw the shape. A small, brown mass, not more than 2 feet long, creeping across the yellow lines with agonizing slowness. At first, he thought it was debris or maybe an injured raccoon. But as he rolled closer, squinting through the fogged windshield, his heart jumped. A sloth, on a road. In Florida, sloths aren't native to the state, at least not anymore. Maybe someone had kept it illegally. Maybe it had escaped from a traveling roadside exhibit. Maybe fate had just gone strange that day. But William knew what he was looking at, 3 toes on each limb, formatted and soaked, moving as if time itself bowed to its will. The sloth didn't look injured, just determined. It crossed the road like it was crossing a continent, blind to the danger around it. And William, without thinking, slammed his brakes and stepped out into the rain. His boots splashed into the water pooled along the shoulder. He didn't even close the truck door. He just walked forward, slowly, arms instinctively out like he used to do when ushering hikers away from bears. The sloth kept moving. And then came the car's first 1, then 5, then 20. A horn blared, someone shouted, but William didn't move. He pointed at the animal and shook his head. No, that was all. No gesture, no drama. Just that one word, like a shield against the impatience of the world. Some drivers got out, angry, confused. A teenager filmed him with his phone. A man in a white SUV threatened to call the police. But none of it mattered to William. He wasn't doing this for show. He was doing it because the creature on the road didn't know what danger was. And something in its crawl, its absolute commitment to going forward, spoke to him. He saw something sacred in its struggle. Something slow and painful and meaningful. It wasn't just a sloth. It was every inch he'd crawled through since Linda died. The rain returned harder now, soaking through his old ranger jacket, running down the creases of his weathered face. He wiped his eyes, not sure if it was the rain or something else, and kept his gaze fixed on the sloth. It was about halfway across now, maybe 10 feet from the edge. He could see the tremble in its arms as it reached forward. The road shimmered with oil and water, a dangerous canvas beneath its tiny claws. Still, it crawled on, no panic, no hesitation, just motion, painful and honest. A woman stepped out of a red minivan, holding a toddler. She looked at William, then at the sloth. Her anger melted almost instantly. "Is it hurt?" she asked. William shook his head. "Just lost." Another horn blared, but softer this time. The crowd behind him began to quiet. People leaned out of windows, pointing, murmuring. The absurdity of the moment slowly gave way to awe. No one had ever seen this before. A man and a sloth, locked in silent coordination, one protecting the other without a word. Time moved like syrup. What felt like seconds stretched into minutes, maybe more. And just when it seemed the sloth might collapse, it reached the gravel edge. William exhaled slowly. He took one step back, allowing it space. The creature climbed over the lip of the road and into the grass, its movements less steady now, as if it had spent all its strength getting there. William crouched low, eyes level with it, letting the rain fall between them. The sloth paused. And then, in a gesture that would haunt William's dreams, it turned its head and looked at him. It was a moment. No one spoke. No one moved. The sloth held its gaze for what felt like an eternity. William had seen many animals in his lifetime, bears, panthers, eagles, but never had he felt so clearly seen by one. The eyes weren't human, but they held something more than instinct. They held understanding, recognition, and in that single, sudden moment, William felt something shift inside him. The wall he'd built, the silence he'd lived in, it cracked. Just a hairline, just enough, then came the rustle. A soft, fragile sound in the bushes just beyond the roadside trees. William straightened up, his heart catching in his chest. The sloth was now slowly climbing the base of a small oak tree, disappearing into the foliage. But the sound behind it didn't match its movement. It was smaller, and even. He took a step forward, squinting into the brush. The rain pattered against the leaves like whispers. And then, under a broken palm frond, he saw it. Another shape, smaller, shivering. A baby. At first, William wasn't sure if what he saw was alive. The tiny body was curled against the root of a tree, no bigger than a kitten, soaked completely through. Its fur clung to its fragile frame like a wet towel, and its limbs didn't move, not even when the thunder rumbled far in the distance. He crouched again, brushing aside the tall grass carefully. There it was, a baby sloth, barely breathing, its eyes half open in that dazed, distant way newborns have when they've been left too long in the cold. His first instinct was to call for help, but he didn't move. Something about the baby's stillness held him in place. The mother had crossed the road to reach this side. Maybe she had left the baby behind, or maybe she had dropped it accidentally during the crawl. Either way, the child hadn't followed. William's chest tightened. He knew what it was like to be left behind. To sit in the aftermath of someone else's departure, waiting for something that never came. He moved slowly, as if in a trance, reaching toward the tiny animal with both hands. His fingers brushed the baby's damp fur. It flinched barely. A flicker of life. William exhaled, steadying his breath. The creature's claws were underdeveloped, but still curled around his thumb with an almost instinctive desperation. Carefully, he lifted it from the root and cradled it against his chest. It was impossibly light, barely more than a whisper of weight, but the responsibility settled into his arms like lead. He stood up, shielding the tiny life from the wind as he looked back toward the road. The traffic had started to clear. A few cars honked lightly, but now more out of courtesy than anger. The man in the white SUV gave him a nod as he passed. Others just stared. The woman with the toddler raised a hand in thanks or solidarity. William wasn't sure. In a world moving too fast, he had chosen to stop. And now, because of that choice, he held a consequence that no one else could carry. He turned back toward his truck, heart racing. What did one do with the baby sloth? There was no handbook for this kind of moment. Inside the cab, he placed the baby in the flannel-lined passenger seat and turned the heater on. The baby didn't make a sound. It simply blinked slowly, curling tighter into the blanket. William's hands trembled slightly as he pulled out his old cell phone. No signal, of course, too far out. He'd have to drive back toward town, maybe 20 miles, before he could reach anyone. But time was not his ally. The baby was cold, and cold was a killer. He had seen it before, seen what happens to small creatures when the warmth runs out, so he did the only thing he could. He took off his jacket and wrapped the baby inside it, pressing it gently against his chest. His heart beat faster than it had in months. He looked down and murmured, "You're not dying today." "Not on my watch." The words came out hoarse, barely audible, but they seemed to settle the little one. William looked through the fogged windshield, uncertain of the road ahead, but suddenly, more certain of his purpose than he had been since the day Linda took her last breath. As he started the engine, he realized something else. This moment wasn't about the sloth anymore. It wasn't even about grief or loneliness. It was about presence. About the weight of choosing to see what others overlook. He had spent so long trying to disappear, trying not to feel, not to hope, not to hurt. But now, with a shivering life in his hands, everything came roaring back. The forest ranger inside him stirred from dormancy. The protector, the man who once believed in things worth saving. The road back to town stretched endlessly before him, winding like a river through a sea of cypress and pine. The rain had calmed, but the skies still hung low and gray. He drove slowly, careful over every bump, glancing at the bundle in the seat beside him every few seconds. The sloth had stopped shaking, though its breaths were still shallow. William kept speaking to it, quiet nothings, fragments of memory, pieces of himself he hadn't shared aloud in years. "Linda would have liked you," he said once, without knowing why. When he reached the outskirts of Homestead, the first bars of signal blinked onto his phone. He called his daughter, Emily, not knowing what to say. She answered quickly, surprised by the call. He explained everything, in pieces, about the sloth, the road, the rain, the baby. There was a long silence on the other end. Then she said, "Bring it here, now." No hesitation, no questions. Just the voice of someone who remembered who her father used to be, and who maybe saw him returning. He arrived at her house just past noon. Emily met him at the curb, barefoot and holding a towel. She took one look at the bundled animal and gasped, "Oh my God, Dad, he's just a baby." He nodded, unable to speak. She wrapped the towel gently around the sloth and brought it inside. William followed, dripping and silent, his boots heavy with mud. The house smelled like rosemary and citrus. Emily's cooking. Photos of her kids hung on the wall. For a moment, the world felt familiar, human again. They placed the baby in a basket lined with warm cloth and rice bags heated in the microwave. Emily, ever the practical daughter, already had her laptop open, searching for local wildlife centers. William stood nearby, arms crossed, unable to stop watching the small rise and fall of the sloth's breathing. "There's a woman named Carla," Emily said. "Veterinarian. She runs a rehab facility just outside town. She's expecting us in an hour." William nodded. "Good." But even as the relief set in, a strange feeling began to rise in him, something unexpected. It was the feeling of not wanting to let go. As they waited, Emily handed him a dry shirt and brewed coffee. She didn't push him with questions, just watched him as he sat beside the basket, whispering to the tiny creature inside. William felt the warmth returning to his hands, his chest, his voice. Milo, that's what he had started calling the baby. He didn't know why. The name just fit. "Hang in there, Milo," he whispered. "You made it across one road. We'll get you the rest of the way." When Carla arrived, she came in with quiet authority. A woman in her 50s with silver hair tied back and eyes that had seen too much. She examined Milo carefully, checking his vitals, his joints, his breath. "He's weak," she said, "but not gone. He has a chance." William exhaled, feeling something uncoil inside him. Carla looked at him and added, "And you gave him that chance." He didn't respond. He only nodded, eyes glassy, unsure what to do with praise that felt too heavy. Then Carla said something else. "Sometimes, the slowest creatures show us the fastest path to what we've been missing." William looked up at her, startled. She smiled gently and packed her tools. "I can take him to the clinic. We'll keep him for observation." But William hesitated. His hand stayed on the edge of the basket just a second too long. Carla noticed. "Unless ... you'd rather stay close." The question hung there like a lifeline. And in that moment, William made a choice that would change both of their lives. Carla had offered to take Milo back to her clinic for care, but William couldn't bring himself to let the sloth go. There was something in the way Milo curled against the edge of the basket, something in the way his small claws clung instinctively to the towel that reminded William of a child reaching in the dark. "If it's all right," he said softly, his voice gravelly, "I'd rather stay with him. At least for the first night." Carla studied him for a moment before nodding. "He'll need to be monitored closely." "I'll show you how." They cleared a space in Emily's laundry room, a small, warm, quiet place with no drafts. Carla laid out a heated pad, a humidity monitor, and a syringe for feeding electrolyte solution. Every 2 hours, even through the night, she instructed. Just a few drops. Don't force anything. William listened carefully, committing every detail to memory. It had been decades since he'd followed instructions this closely. Carla handed him a checklist and smiled faintly. You've got the hands of someone who's done this before. I used to rescue owls, William said. And snakes. Once had a panther cub in my truck for 3 days. Carla raised her eyebrows, clearly impressed. You're halfway back to being a ranger, she said. The words hit William harder than she probably meant them to. Back to being a ranger. Back to being someone. He looked down at Milo, now tucked tightly in the towel, his breathing soft but regular. I don't know if I ever stopped, William murmured. I just forgot. The first night was long. William barely slept. Every time Milo stirred or whimpered, William was there offering warmth, offering water, offering whispers. He sat in a folding chair beside the basket, a thermos of coffee at his feet, the checklist in his lap. Every 2 hours like clockwork, he checked vitals, changed towels, adjusted the heat. There was no panic, only precision. His body remembered the rhythm of care, the small rituals of vigilance. But this time, it wasn't for an injured hiker or a trapped animal. This time, it was personal. Emily came in around 4 a.m. and found her father slumped in the chair, eyes half closed, hand resting protectively on the edge of the basket. She didn't say anything, just walked over and placed a blanket across his shoulders. You're not doing this alone, she whispered. He stirred but didn't speak. There was something sacred about the silence between them. For the first time in years, William was fully present, not haunted by the past. Not drifting through the present, but here. With Milo, by morning, Carla returned to check on them. She looked over Milo with clinical focus but paused when she saw William's careful logbook, every detail recorded in neat, cramped writing. You're taking this seriously, she said, not as a compliment, but as a statement of fact. William looked at her. Every life matters. Carla nodded. Most people wouldn't go this far, William shrugged. Most people didn't watch their whole world disappear and live to talk about it. Carla sat beside him for a moment, quiet. Is that what happened to you? She asked gently. William hesitated. He didn't usually talk about Linda. The words were stuck in a drawer he rarely opened. But he answered. She was the one who remembered birthdays. She made me laugh in my sleep. When she died, I didn't know how to be. Anything else? Carla listened, not with pity, but with presence. And this little guy, he gave you something to be again. William looked down. He didn't ask me to. He just was. That was enough. Over the next few days, Milo began to improve. His limbs moved with more purpose. He drank more from the syringe. Once, William caught him blinking up at a ceiling fan with obvious curiosity, his little head moving back and forth like a pendulum. That day, William built a miniature jungle gym using broom handles and towels. He needs to climb, he told Emily, even if it's only a few inches. Watching Milo explore that makeshift structure, William felt something light bloom in his chest, something like pride. But not everyone understood. Word had spread quickly through Emily's neighborhood. Some neighbors were supportive, curious. Others weren't. One afternoon, a stern man named Harold knocked on the door, arms crossed. You're keeping a wild animal in there? He asked. What happens when it bites a kid? Or carries disease? William tried to explain, but Harold wasn't interested. It's not right. You want to grieve, do it like everyone else. Not by turning your house into a zoo. William stood on the porch for a long time after Harold left, unsure of how to feel. He wasn't angry. He understood fear, even when it came out sideways. But the words lingered. Do it like everyone else. He thought of the months he had spent in silence, in darkness, in a life that felt half-lived. That was grief the way everyone else did it, and it nearly killed him. What he had now wasn't perfect, but it was alive. It was his. Later that night, he sat with Milo under the warm glow of a desk lamp and whispered, Not everyone will understand. But that's all right. We don't need everyone. Milo blinked at him slowly, like he agreed. William reached out and gently touched the sloth's paw. We just need each other to keep going. It wasn't poetry, it wasn't profound, but it was true. And for the first time in a long time, truth felt like enough. But the doubt lingered. What if he was doing more harm than good? What if keeping Milo was selfish, Emily noticed his silence the next day and sat with him on the back steps. "You're not broken, Dad," she said gently. "You're just grieving differently than most. That doesn't make you wrong." He looked at her. "I don't want to fail him," she smiled. "You won't. You already didn't." Then came the email from Carla. The Department of Fish and Wildlife had been notified of the incident standard protocol. A regional agent wanted to conduct a home visit. William's stomach dropped. He had done everything right. Still, the fear crept in. He looked at Milo, now sleeping soundly in a towel hammock he'd made from Linda's old scarf. What if they took him away? What if this was just a borrowed piece? He sat awake all night, watching Milo breathe, waiting for the knock on the door that would decide everything. The next morning arrived like a quiet storm, no thunder, no wind, just the low, steady hum of anticipation. William had woken before the sun, showered, shaved and put on his cleanest shirt. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. There was still sadness in his eyes, but something else had returned, a kind of steadiness, like a tree that bends in the wind but refuses to fall. At 9 a.m. sharp, there was a knock at the door. He opened it to find a woman in a forest green jacket holding a clipboard. Her name was Rachel Owens. She was younger than he expected, maybe mid-30s, with kind eyes and the kind of neutral expression government employees train themselves to wear. "Mr. Davis," she said, offering a firm handshake. "May I come in?" William nodded and stepped aside. Milo was in his usual basket near the window, half asleep, his little claws wrapped around a makeshift branch. Rachel's eyes followed him immediately. "So that's the Sloth," she said, almost to herself. "The famous traffic stopper." She spent the next 30 minutes asking questions: where the Sloth had been found, how William had cared for him, what food he was eating, how often he was monitored. William answered each one calmly, occasionally glancing at his logbook or pointing to the heating setup. Rachel took notes but showed no sign of judgment. Once, when Milo blinked up at her and gave a soft stretch, Rachel smiled. "He seems comfortable with you." William simply nodded. "I think he feels safe." She wrote something down but didn't reply. Then came the question he was dreading. "Mr. Davis, are you aware that harboring a wild animal without a permit is a violation of state and federal law?" William met her gaze. "Yes, I didn't plan this. I just couldn't walk away." Rachel steadied him for a moment. "I believe you." She closed the clipboard. "But that doesn't change the regulations. Animals like this, especially exotics, can't be privately kept unless approved for rehabilitation or long-term educational placement." William felt the floor shift slightly beneath him. Rachel walked over to Milo and crouched beside the basket. "I've seen a lot of cases. People take in wild animals with good intentions, and it goes badly. They don't know how to feed them, how to handle them. The animal ends up worse off." William bristled slightly, then stopped himself. "But not this time," he said quietly. Rachel looked up at him. "No, not this time." She stood. "You've done everything right, but I have to report my findings. There'll be a decision in a few days." She turned to leave, then paused. "Off the record, if this were my call, I'd let you keep him." She tapped the clipboard with her pen. "But it's not. It'll go to the board." And then she was gone. The door clicked shut like a punctuation mark on a sentence William wasn't ready to end. He sat beside Milo, unsure what to do with the emptiness that returned so suddenly. For the first time since the roadside, he felt powerless. He had done everything he could. Now, all that was left was waiting. That night, Emily cooked dinner for the three of them: grilled vegetables, sweet potatoes, cornbread. William barely tasted the food. Milo sat in his sling near the table, eyes half closed, oblivious to the uncertainty hanging in the air. "You don't have to be strong all the time," Emily said gently. "I know what this means to you." William looked up, his voice flat. "He doesn't belong to me. That's the problem." Emily shook her head. "Maybe not legally, but he chose you. Don't forget that." 3 days passed without news. William spent them in limbo, oscillating between quiet hope and creeping dread. He took Milo on short walks around the backyard, let him climb a hammock he strung between two chairs, and read aloud from old wildlife manuals just to fill the silence. On the third night, a memory surfaced, Linda's voice, soft and amused. "The best things that ever happened to us were accidents. You just have to trust when they show up." He looked down at Milo, sleeping in his lap. You were one of those, weren't you? On the fourth day, Rachel called. We met this morning, she said. The board reviewed your case. We've approved you for a provisional wildlife foster permit conditional on regular check-ins and supervised care. William didn't say anything. She added, You're not in trouble, Mr. Davis. Quite the opposite. They were moved by your report. And the video footage. Someone sent in the recording from the highway. You blocking traffic. You protecting him. William exhaled for the first time in days. The silence on the line stretched. Then Rachel said, They'd like you to consider registering as an educational partner. That would let you keep Milo long-term as a live ambassador for wildlife conservation. William blinked. You mean, he can stay? Rachel chuckled. Yes, Mr. Davis, he can stay. William sat down slowly, the weight of relief too much to stand with. He looked across the room where Milo dangled upside down from a wooden dowel. Thank you, he whispered. You don't know what this means, but he did. He knew exactly what it meant. That evening, Emily brought out a cake homemade, lopsided, and perfect. She'd written Welcome Home, Milo, in green icing across the top. William chuckled, genuinely. They took pictures. Milo, of course, showed no interest in the cake but clung to William's sleeve as if he understood the celebration was somehow his. That night, William didn't just sleep, he rested. For the first time in over a year, his body gave itself permission to stop bracing for loss. In the days that followed, the routine settled deeper, morning feedings, climbing time. Small visits from curious neighbors who had heard about the man with the sloth. Children came with drawings. Seniors brought food for the birds. William never sought attention, but the story had found him anyway and it spread like wildfire. One afternoon, a reporter from the local paper showed up, asking for an interview. William agreed only if Milo could be in the photo. The article ran the next Sunday. Headline: He blocked traffic for a sloth and found his way back to life. The paper sold out. Emails began arriving, dozens, then hundreds. People shared their own stories of loss, of unlikely rescues, of rediscovered purpose. Some sent donations, others sent handwritten letters. A woman from Oregon mailed a tiny handmade sweater for Milo. William read each message carefully. Some made him cry, others made him laugh. All of them reminded him that people were still capable of wonder. Still, the quiet moments remained his favorite. The evenings on the porch, the slow creak of the chair. Milo's soft breath against his chest, the way the sky turned gold before it dimmed. It was in these moments that William felt Linda's presence most. Not in ghosts, not in signs, but in the peace that now lived where sorrow used to dwell. She would have loved this, he thought, not just the sloth, but the way he had come back to himself without even realizing it. One night, Emily asked him, What made you stop the truck that day? William thought for a long time before answering, because he was trying to cross. And I knew how hard that is. Emily nodded, understanding too much to speak. And with that, the night moved on quiet, complete, and full of something unnameable. It had been nearly 6 weeks since William stood in the rain blocking traffic for a creature who couldn't have weighed more than a newborn. Now, Milo was stronger, more alert, and unmistakably attached to his human guardian. He still moved with sloth-like patience, but with each day, his grip grew firmer, his curiosity broader. William began noticing small milestones: how Milo would turn his head toward music, how he seemed to respond to the rustling sound of the fridge opening, how his claws now held William's arm with purpose, not just instinct. Carla, who had once seemed skeptical about the bond, now visited as a friend more than a vet. She brought Milo special enrichment items: a mesh ball filled with herbs, textured ropes, frozen fruit cubes. William watched, fascinated, as Milo inspected each one slowly, like a scientist discovering a new element. He's thriving, Carla said one morning, sipping coffee on the porch. More than I expected. He's still wild, but he looks for you. That's not nothing. William nodded, eyes on Milo hanging sleepily from the porch beam. He saved me first, he said. Carla smiled and didn't argue. The education partnership proposal had been approved, which meant William could now visit schools, libraries, and assisted living centers with Milo under the banner of conservation. Carla helped him apply for a small state grant to build a mobile enclosure. Emily helped design brochures, A volunteer from the local animal shelter offered to build a website. What started as a single rescue had become a cause way for William to not only help animals, but people too. The quiet man with a sloth on his shoulder had something to say again. Their first visit was at an elementary school just outside town. William wore a crisp button-down and carried Milo in a soft-sided carrier lined with fleece. The classroom fell into an odd hush as soon as Milo peeked out. The children gasped, then whispered. William stood in front of them, nerves prickling his skin, and told the story about the rainy road, about choosing to stop, about how something small and slow had reminded him to live again. When he finished, a boy in the back raised his hand. Is he your pet? William shook his head gently. No, he's my friend. After the presentation, the children lined up quietly, each one whispering their questions. Does he have dreams? Does he know you? Did he cry when you found him? William answered each one with honesty, never dumbing things down. I think we both cried, he said to one girl, who nodded solemnly like she understood something most adults didn't. Milo was patient through it all, blinking slowly, reaching his paw once or twice as if trying to make contact. One boy pressed his hand to the glass. He looks peaceful, he said. William smiled. He is. That day marked the beginning of something William hadn't expected to schedule. A purpose. Invitations from more schools began pouring in, and soon, from nursing homes as well. At one center, a woman in her 80s broke into tears just seeing Milo. My husband used to call me his little sloth, she said through laughter and sobs. He said I slowed him down just enough to notice the world. William sat with her for almost an hour. They didn't talk much. Just watched Milo nap together, lost in memory and something more. Emily began documenting these visits, compiling photos and stories into a digital scrapbook. You should write a book, she told him one night over dinner. Call it The Man Who Waited or something. William laughed, genuinely. Too many chapters, he said, but the idea stayed with him. That people might want to hear from someone like him, not a hero, not a scientist, just a man who didn't look away when it mattered. He began jotting notes in a journal. Memories of Linda, Milo's growth, thoughts on grief, on stillness, on paying attention. But not all reactions were warm. A few online critics accused him of exploiting the sloth for attention. Wild animals belong in the wild, one comment read. Not on your shoulder like a fashion statement. William read them, but didn't respond. He knew the truth. He knew the nights he sat up feeding Milo drop by drop. He knew what it meant to cry silently into a towel while waiting for a tiny creature's chest to rise and fall. He knew that what they shared had nothing to do with showmanship and everything to do with survival. Still, the doubts sometimes returned in quiet waves. One afternoon, while cleaning Milo's enclosure, William paused and looked at the scarf hammock he'd made from Linda's things. For a moment, grief pulled at him like a familiar tide. Would she have approved? He asked aloud. Milo, perched on a low branch, blinked as if considering the question. William chuckled softly. She would have called you my second chance. He stood up and whispered to the empty room, and she would have been right. Things changed the morning Carla brought news from the sanctuary in Costa Rica. There's a sloth reserve that's heard about Milo. They're interested in working with you virtually, for now, but they want to study his behavior. They say it's rare for a rescued sloth to maintain this level of human bonding without signs of distress. William listened carefully. And what does that mean? Carla looked at him seriously. It means you're doing something right, but it also means he's not like the others. He might never be releasable. That night, William sat on the porch with Milo curled up in his lap. The breeze was soft, full of spring scents. The stars had just begun to bloom across the sky. You hear that? He whispered. You're not broken. You're just ... different. Milo didn't respond, but he shifted slightly, resting his head against William's chest. The warmth between them felt sacred, like something given back after years of loss. William closed his eyes. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid to meet it. The next morning, a package arrived. Inside was a custom-made vest for Milo, lightweight, breathable, with a patch that read Conservation Ambassador. There was also a letter from the State Wildlife Department, officially recognizing Milo and William's work together. William stared at the badge for a long time. Then, slowly, he pinned it to his ranger hat, the same one he hadn't worn in over a year. "Looks like I'm back on duty," he whispered. The vest wasn't just a piece of fabric, it was a statement. William stood in front of the mirror, Milo clinging to his side, the vest snug against the sloth's back, the little badge glinting beneath the light. He hadn't worn his ranger hat since the day he packed up his locker at the park service. But now, with it perched back on his head, he didn't feel like he was impersonating the man he used to be. He felt like someone reborn, older, slower, but whole again. And Milo, in his quiet way, seemed to sense the shift too. Their next few presentations were packed. Word of mouth had turned into momentum. Churches, senior centers, even a local community college invited them to speak. William adjusted quickly to the rhythm. He began each visit not with facts about sloths, but with a question: have you ever been forced to slow down? It struck a nerve. People leaned in, they listened. They saw in his story pieces of their own grief, hesitation, guilt, rediscovery. Milo wasn't the only one drawing them in. It was the truth William carried now without fear. At one retirement home, a former nurse named Barbara clutched his hand and said, "I lost my husband last year. Haven't felt anything since." Until today, her eyes glistened as she stared at Milo. "He reminds me that healing doesn't have to be fast or loud." William nodded. He didn't need to say anything more. He let her hold the sloth for a moment, watched as her breathing steadied just from the weight of another living being trusting her. Sometimes, that was all it took. A gesture, a presence, a pause. The attention from the public brought new opportunities and with them, new choices. A nonprofit organization called Green Heart Collective reached out offering a partnership. They wanted William to be the face of a new outreach campaign for wildlife-human connection. Videos, interviews, maybe even a short documentary. William was hesitant. "I didn't do this to be a symbol," he told Emily. She smiled gently. "But that's the point. Symbols aren't chosen. They're revealed." He thought about that for a long time. Eventually, he agreed with one condition. Everything would focus on the story, not the man. The story of noticing, of standing still, of choosing compassion when everyone else drove past. The film crew arrived 2 weeks later, just 3 people with quiet voices and soft cameras. They spent days filming William and Milo's routines, the feedings, the backyard walks, the educational talks, the stillness. They interviewed Emily, Carla, some of the children from the schools. The working title was The Man Who Waited. During one interview, they asked William, "What do you think you and Milo are teaching people?" He paused, then said simply, that being slow isn't being lost. That sometimes, you don't need to know where you're going, you just need to know it matters that you go. The interviewer nodded silently, understanding that the most powerful truths often come without flourish. Milo, balanced carefully in William's lap, reached up and touched his beard with one tiny claw. The moment was captured forever on film. The day after the crew left, William received a call from Rachel Owens, the wildlife officer who had first evaluated him. She'd watched the raw footage. "You've changed people," she said. "That's rare. The board wants to recognize your work formally. There's going to be a ceremony. You and Milo will be honored for contributions to wildlife education and public empathy." William laughed softly. "Public empathy, that's a new one." Rachel chuckled too. "Well, whatever you want to call it, it's working." That evening, William stood on the back porch watching the light change over the trees. Milo was climbing slowly across the beams, pausing occasionally to look back at him. William had read somewhere that sloths could remember kind gestures, that they didn't forget those who had helped them. He wondered if Milo truly understood everything that had happened, or if understanding wasn't the point. Maybe connection didn't require comprehension. Maybe it just required care. When the day of the ceremony came, William almost didn't go. He wasn't used to applause, to spotlights. But Emily convinced him, it's not just about you. It's about everything you've built. About showing others what healing looks like. So he dressed carefully, clean shirt, ranger hat, boots polished. Milo wore his vest. Together they stood at the community hall, surrounded by people clapping, crying, listening. William spoke only briefly. "I didn't save him," he said. "He slowed me down enough to save myself." After the ceremony, a mother approached with her teenage son. The boy didn't speak, only held out a small wooden carving, a sloth, delicately shaped, with the initials W and M etched beneath it. William's hands shook slightly as he took it. "He doesn't talk much," the mother explained. Hasn't since the accident, but he read your story online. Said it made him feel seen. William looked at the boy and placed the carving in Milo's basket. He's seen you too, he said. The boy smiled. That night, William didn't sleep. He lay in bed listening to the soft breathing coming from the corner where Milo now had a more permanent enclosure. The little ambassador was curled into his hammock, paws twitching slightly, perhaps dreaming of trees, or roads, or quiet men with open arms. William stared at the ceiling, feeling full. Not just of pride, but of a strange, new peace, the kind that comes after the storm, after the crawl, when you finally found a place to rest. A week later, Carla brought news from Costa Rica again. They're asking if you'd consider bringing Milo down for behavioral research. They're offering to fund the trip, house you both. It'd be short, just 2 weeks. Think of it as a working vacation. William hesitated. He'd never left the country, but when he looked at Milo, the answer came clear. He deserves to see where he came from. Maybe I do too. Carla nodded. I think it's time. As he packed his bags a few days later, William placed the wooden carving from the boy at the top of his suitcase. It would go with them, as a reminder, as a symbol, of the moment two lost things found each other and slowed down just enough to change everything. The trip to Costa Rica marked a turning point not just in William's life, but in Milo's journey too. The moment they stepped off the plane, the humid air wrapped around them like an old song. The forest reserve was nothing like Florida, deeper, louder, alive in ways that stirred something ancient in both man and animal. Milo's eyes moved constantly, tracking birds overhead, sniffing the bark of trees, as if chasing ghosts of a past he had never known. William followed quietly, a visitor in a world that felt strangely familiar, as though some part of him belonged to the wild too. Researchers welcomed them with curiosity and care. Dr. Esteban Ruiz, a soft-spoken biologist with decades of experience, observed Milo for hours. His bond to you is extraordinary, he said. We've studied rescued sloths before, but this is different. He looks for you first, not food. You're his tree. William chuckled at that. I guess I'm the only one who didn't keep walking. Esteban looked at him closely. And maybe that's why he chose you, not because you saved him, but because you stayed. Each day in the jungle brought something new. Milo was introduced to other sloths carefully, slowly. Some hissed and moved away. Others ignored him. But one young female stayed close. Her name was Lucia, another rescue from the roadside. She moved with the same quiet grace as Milo, her eyes soft and watchful. William observed them from a shaded bench, hands folded, heart tight. He knew what was happening, knew what it meant. Milo was remembering something older than fear. He was remembering where he came from. On the 7th night, Esteban sat beside William with a clipboard and a worn expression. He's ready, he said. If you're willing, we can begin the process of reintegration. It'll be slow, and he may choose not to stay. But the forest is calling him. William nodded, his throat tight. I always knew I wasn't his destination. Just a bridge. Esteban placed a hand on his shoulder. That bridge changed everything. William didn't respond. He just looked out at the canopy, where Milo clung to a branch beside Lucia, his movements sure and quiet. The release wasn't dramatic. No crowds, no speeches. Just William, Esteban, and a few field staff standing at the edge of a forest corridor as Milo crawled from his carrier to the nearest tree. He hesitated once, turning his head back toward William. Their eyes met across the space between bark and boots, vine and vein. No sound passed, but everything was said. Then Milo moved upward, slowly, deliberately, until he disappeared into the green. William stood still for a long time after that, arms hanging loose at his sides, heart both full and breaking. They stayed one more night at the reserve. In the morning, a ranger handed William a small note and a carved sloth charm. It was from one of the local children who had helped care for Lucia. The note said, "Thank you for showing the world that being slow can still mean being strong." William folded it carefully, placed it in his wallet next to a photo of Linda, and smiled. When he boarded the plane back to the States, he wasn't carrying grief anymore. He was carrying legacy. Back in Florida, life returned to its own quiet rhythm. The house no longer echoed with Milo's climbing or the soft shuffle of his claws, but William felt him everywhere. In the way he moved slower now, more intentionally. In the way he paused to feel the wind through the porch screen. In the way he spoke to children during presentations, with a softness that wasn't pity, but presence. People still asked about Milo. "He's home," William would say. "And I am too." The nonprofit they started, Stillness and Sanctuary, expanded. Other retirees joined. Former EMTs, school teachers, even a widowed sculptor who built birdhouses for recovering owls. The center became more than a rehab site, it became a haven for those who had nowhere else to place their care. Every animal was matched with a human partner. Every story mattered. William trained volunteers, spoke at conservation events, and kept Milo's hammock hanging by the window just in case. Emily eventually turned the story into a book. She called it Slower Than the Rain. It wasn't a bestseller, but it didn't need to be. It found its audience, people who were healing, searching, waiting. William wrote the foreword himself. "This is not a story about a sloth," it began. "It's a story about what happens when you stop running from what hurts long enough to help something smaller than yourself." The first time he read that aloud at a library event, the room went silent. Then someone began to cry. And then, slowly, others joined in. On the one-year anniversary of the rescue, the town dedicated a small garden in William's name. A bench beneath a tree, a plaque with a simple quote, "He waited." And because of that, the world moved differently. William didn't attend the ceremony. He was in Costa Rica again visiting the reserve, this time as a guest speaker. Esteban met him at the gate and said, "He's still close, comes down every few weeks. We think he remembers you." William walked into the forest, eyes scanning the trees. He didn't need to see Milo to believe it. Some bonds live beyond sight. As he walked through the thick green trails, he paused near a clearing and sat on a rock. The air was alive with insects, birds, and time. He pulled the carving from the boy in Florida from his pocket, ran a thumb across the letters W and M, and breathed in deeply. He had no plans, no presentations, no duties in that moment. Just a heart that finally beat with rhythm again, and memories that no longer hurt. They hummed, softly, like the rustling leaves above him. That evening, he returned to the lodge and found a letter from Emily waiting in his inbox. A photo was attached, one of her kids holding a sloth plush toy in a school assembly. The subject line read, "You started something." William smiled. He hadn't wanted to start anything, but sometimes, the best things grow from what was never planned. Just like a sloth in the middle of a rainy road. Just like a man who stopped and stayed when everyone else drove on. Years passed, and William grew older. His steps slower, his voice softer, but his purpose stayed sharp. He continued to tell the story not because he wanted to relive it, but because others needed to hear it. In every audience, there was always one person who came up afterward with trembling hands or tearful eyes. "I lost someone too. I didn't know how to keep going. I needed this." He would nod, place a hand on their shoulder, and say, "Then you're exactly who this is for." Eventually, William passed the leadership of the nonprofit to Emily and a team of new caretakers. He kept a small cabin near the edge of the Everglades, surrounded by trees that whispered in the wind. He didn't miss the noise. He didn't need crowds. Just his books, the hammock, and the occasional letter from Costa Rica. Sometimes, Esteban would send a photo Milo climbing, resting, blinking up at the canopy. The last one came on a spring afternoon, with a note, "He's still slow, still strong, still yours." On the last page of his journal, William wrote one final entry, "There are moments that divide your life in two. Mine was in the rain. I thought I stopped for a sloth. But really I stopped for me. He didn't just need saving, I did too. And together, inch by inch, we made it across. He didn't just save a sloth, he found himself."